Well, hello and welcome to our fourth and final webinar co-hosted with the Singapore Airshow, where we'll be focusing on a theme that's always high on the agenda at the biennial event, innovation. And in particular, the city-state's role as the hub of the giant Asia-Pacific aviation market and a crucible and proving ground for many of the most exciting technologies unleashed by the industry. To discuss the potential of these new ideas, I'm joined by a panel representing some of the biggest names in aerospace and some of its most exciting market disruptors. They are, firstly, representing our exclusive webinar partner CFM, Vikram Reddy, who heads up the India engineering team at GE Aviation, one of the two companies behind the brand that makes more commercial engines than anyone else. Vikram leads a team of 500 engineers who provide design, analysis, and software solutions for jet engines, components, and integrated systems for commercial aircraft. Secondly, Anand Stanley, the president of Airbus Asia Pacific. Based in Singapore, Anand leads the strategy for all the Airbus divisions across the region, from commercial aircraft sales and government affairs to joint venture and other industrial activities. Now, Airbus has had a relationship with Singapore since the 1960s, when, as Aerospace, it supplied the young city-state with its first Alouette 3 helicopters. It employs around 800 people in Singapore and is a base at Seletar Aerospace Park. My third guest has perhaps an even stronger link with Singapore. Jeffrey Lam is the president, commercial aerospace for ST Engineering, Singapore's homegrown industrial and technology powerhouse. His commercial aerospace business straddles MRO, manufacturing, and asset management. And Jeffrey's worked at ST Engineering in a variety of roles. Now, our final two panelists represent one of the most exciting segments to emerge in aerospace for decades: urban air mobility. Hon Long Chu is responsible for launching Volocopter's first commercial air taxi service in Singapore, which a German company describes as one of the most promising markets for this new form of air transport. He has a Silicon Valley background and a Harvard MBA, and is now hoping to convince cities, governments, and businesses across the region to embrace the opportunity of the eVTOL revolution. Andre Stein is the CEO of Eve, the Embraer spin-off dedicated to developing urban air mobility solutions. He too has worked in Silicon Valley, as well as Australia, Brazil, and Singapore, and has served in a number of leadership roles with Embraer, including as the head of product strategy during the development of the E2 regional jet family. He describes himself as an avid traveler who is passionate about mobility. So Vikram, let me start with you. What are the emerging technologies that you are most excited about? What are the innovations that could really change the way that we travel in the 2030s and beyond?
Hey, first, good morning and good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining from. Very excited to be part of this panel and part of this discussion today. I can start with saying that there was no more exciting time for an aviation engineer or a technologist than now, Modo. And I'll tell you why. So there is, of course, this noble cause before all of us as an aviation industry, that we want to reach carbon neutrality by 2050, and it's a steep path from now to then that we need to take to achieve that objective. And technology is a big part of that solution, as many of us recognize. And I can see a number of technology breakthroughs coming in the next decade that would make it possible for us to achieve our sustainability goals. And I'll name a few of those that are most exciting that we are working on right now. First, if you think about the propulsive efficiency of the engine, it is directly tied to our fan that is at the front of the engine. And we are looking at concepts of open fan, which would give us the highest propulsive efficiency. And what that means for a technologist is that we need to work with materials that are lightweight. And we had, as GE, we had history of working with composite blades uh, from 90s up until now on the G9X engine. So that experience is very useful for us to take it a stretch beyond that now to work on these open fans. We need gearboxes and transmissions between our Avio division and Saffron transmission work that we did. Again, a wealth of experience we have on the gearbox and transmissions. So when you have a large fan, it's very imperative you need a geared mechanism inside the engine, so that could help us achieve that technology. Then, if you move into the core of the engine, which runs very hard, it's very important for us to invent materials that would make the core more and more compact as we go forward. Aerodynamics will play a big role in making the core more efficient and hence more shorter and more compact. So we have uh, all of you know that we have industrialized ceramic matrix composites, which are high temperature materials. So all these aspects will help us get better thermal efficiency in the engine. So the bigger fans and gears, more propulsive efficiency, more thermal efficiency because of hotter core, compact core, aerodynamics. Then there is a lot of work that needs to be done on the fuels, right? So to start with sustainable aviation fuels, we've recently seen first 100% SAFs flight that's been successfully run by CFM. So that's an exciting start, but there is a long way to go for us to get SAFs as the mainstream source of fuel for the air travel, which will definitely help reduce the emissions. And in the long run, possibly more alternate fuels like hydrogen, which will again be very exciting challenge to solve for us to be able to understand the combustion characteristics and how to design the gas turbine with hydrogen as a fuel. So the list can go even bigger, but this is as exciting as it gets, Mardo, for us as engineers now.
Well, that's great, Vikram. A really exciting time to be an engineer in aerospace, I think, and we'll cover a lot of these topics, I'm sure, throughout the next hour. Anand, if I can turn to you, COVID-19 has been really tough on this region. For most of the past 2 years, travel to Singapore has been difficult, if not impossible, and to some countries it still is. What sort of aviation market do you see emerging from this crisis in Asia Pacific? And how different might it look?
Well, thanks for having me, Murdo. This is, again, it's been a pleasure and to represent Airbus here from Singapore. The pandemic has been hard all over the world. The difference is that we start to see recovery in North America and Europe, ticking quite a bit in 2021. While we haven't seen the same in the Asia Pacific region. It's been primarily because of border controls across the region, the way the countries have been managing their sanitary measures, and not just sanitary measures, but quarantine and basically not allowing freedom of movement of people. And despite that, last year, I would say we at Airbus were able to have about 33% of our global deliveries in the Asia Pacific region. But the demand is hugely pent up. And what's needed as soon as possible is for governments to start removing what restrictions are left, which is moving away completely from quarantine measures, opening borders back up to what they were in 2019. and managing more through testing of people and looking at more pragmatic measures in place. Now, what's that going to do? What I believe it will do is, again, restart not just the freedom of movement, but aviation itself in the region, and bring it back to where it's supposed to be, which is we believe that by the next 20 years, this region will be at least half or more of global aviation. And to start that trajectory once again to moving back in that direction.
Excellent. Okay. Well, that's I'm sure something we would all agree with and hope for, and we can talk a bit perhaps about how much some of the product development and technologies that will make that trajectory possible as we go on through this discussion. Jeffrey, if I can turn to you, what is it about Singapore that makes it, along with a handful of other countries, punch so much above its weight when it comes to technology in aerospace and beyond?
Yeah, thank you for having me. Certainly, Singapore is a very unique location. In fact, obviously, we're very happy to be headquartered in Singapore. But as a global company, we find ourselves having more business, more customers, and more employees outside Singapore. But indeed, Singapore is a very unique ecosystem. You know, it's kind of like a melting pot for innovation. If you look at the key elements of success that requires innovation and technology input, whether it be R&D resources, financial resources, talent, infrastructure, many companies partnering and working together in one location, strong government support, many research institutes and universities. I think you find that Singapore presents a very compelling case for companies that want to look for breakthroughs in innovation, partnerships, finding the financial resources, and really we've been very fortunate to be here to enjoy all that in Singapore.
Okay, excellent. Well, again, we'll talk about the strengths of Singapore as a sort of technology hub as we continue the discussion. Hon Lung Cho, why is Volocopter so excited about the UAM opportunity in this part of the world? And why do you think that Singapore and some of the surrounding countries will be quicker to adopt this technology perhaps than other regions?
Sure. Thank you again for having me on the panel today and the opportunity to present Volocopter. Maybe I just, since we are a relatively new kid on the block, maybe I just give a brief introduction of Volocopter. We are a German air taxi company founded in 2011. So more than 10 years ago, with offices mostly in Brussels, Munich, and in Singapore, and also a joint venture in Chengdu, China. We are creating electric vertical takeoff landing aircrafts, eVTOLs, and we hope to improve, urban mobility in this world. We are one of the only eVTOL upstarts to hold both a design organization approval and a production organization approval from EASA, which are two of the strategic certifications that we need to really design and then produce aircraft in-house. Looking forward, when we started our journey in 2011, we were the first crewed eVTOL flight in aviation history. And we did that also again here in Singapore in October of 2019. Very proud to have worked very closely with the city-states government agencies on that. We've committed to launching our services in the next 2 to 3 years in Paris and of course here in Singapore. So maybe to address your question, why did we choose Singapore? I think, frankly, I think Jeffrey couldn't have said it, better. I think it's really about the whole ecosystem, the efficient government, the availability of talent, R&D, focus, capital as well. So when we consider all of these factors, we see Singapore as a lighthouse market for us into the Southeast Asia, and of course, as you said, the broader Asia Pacific region. And when we then consider, our ability to go to market here, it really stands as a really credible way for us to launch our service, to showcase that, and then, right, to quickly export, right, and to broaden that base to the broader Southeast Asia and Asia Pacific region. And the reason for that is, when it comes down to it, customer demand. When we look at our service, the primary value that we offer is time savings for business travelers who need to get to their meetings on time, or frankly, for anyone who needs to get somewhere on time. And when we look at the ground congestion and the increasing urbanization of this region, and frankly, globally, 68%, the UN has said that 68% of the world's population will live in cities by 2030. We believe the demand in this region will far outstrip the capacity of ground transportation options. And that's where we, as Volocopter, are able to bring our aircrafts in to offer a new form of transportation in the low altitude airspace.
Okay. Thank you. And finally, Andre Stein, we've not perhaps really seen a truly disruptive force in commercial aviation for decades. How we fly today on commercial jets, on helicopters, on light aircraft is essentially an evolution of technology and platforms that began life before any of us were born. A pretty impressive evolution in a lot of cases, but essentially it's the same basic technology that was around in the 60s and the 50s and the 70s. Is there a true disruption what we're looking at with urban air mobility, with eVTOLs?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me here. It's always a pleasure to be able to have the chance to talk about how you see the future. And it is, to your point, a very exciting time in aerospace indeed, and the time of a revolution. And it's particularly great to be able to talk here in Singapore, or across the world, to be there virtually in Singapore. I started my career in Singapore, so it has a deep place in my heart. And you are right, it's unique. It's once in a lifetime exercise of everything that aviation can do. Thinking about everything aviation has done in terms of transportation. Today, you can cross a continent, you can cross oceans in just a few hours. But then when you get to the airport, it might take quite a few hours to get to your final destination. So we really believe that we can bring a lot of the benefit that that aviation, particularly commercial aviation, brought to transportation in a very literal sense, closer to the people, and be able to give that time back through that. And while aviation, I mean, there are massive innovations, and you see happening all the time. But you're right when you say that an aircraft has been a tube and a wing for a while, right? And we still fly in a very similar way we were flying in the 60s. It looked the same. There are a lot of technology inside. There are a lot of innovations inside indeed. But now we are almost back to the early days of aerospace. If an aircraft is a tube and a wing, a eVTOL or any other mode of urban air mobility, we are kind of back to a blank sheet design. We can have a lot of room for creativity and to come up with new solutions. And why is that? Because there are some technologies that can really disrupt aerospace. Things like electrification. That's not only about changing the motor, changing a turbine for electric motor. It really gives you more room to thinking about distributed propulsion, for example, and novel solutions that can enhance the efficiency much more and create solutions that are really an option for people to use as one way. And it's not intended to replace cars or completely create a world where no one drives around. It's not it. It is about giving people a choice, another choice to go from A to B in a very efficient and affordable way. One way I look at it, it is to thinking about everything the internet has done to us, right? Thinking about how content now it's able to go from A to B in a very efficient, in a very affordable, in a very integrated way. There are a lot of technologies behind it, fiber optic, satellite, 4G, 5G, but for the user, it's very seamless. our vision for the future is nothing short of bringing that to the physical world. People and goods going from A to B, wherever the distance might be. It might be the case of urban mobility, shorter distance, but going from A to B in a very seamless, integrated, affordable way. And that thanks to some of the technologies that can disrupt aerospace. And if you're thinking about disruptive innovation, quite often starts on the entry level. So I mentioned about electrification, right? And electrification and batteries and electrical motors are not ready yet to replace a larger commercial jet, for example. We cannot have an aircraft flying hundreds of people for maybe thousands of kilometers with electrical engine yet. But you can use the same type of technology to disrupt aerospace in the very entry level. Aircraft that don't go that far, that carry just a few people at a time, and that's exactly on the sweet spot for urban air mobility. So that's a great way to bring this innovation to aerospace, and more than that, to bring this new opportunities, new choices for the user, for all of us.
Okay, excellent. Well, I'm going to come on to a lot of these points a little bit later, and thank you all for these amazing summaries of your business and some of the challenges that the industry is facing. But before we move on, just a quick reminder to the audience that we're very happy to take your questions. We're seeing some of them come in already, but can I just say, can you use the Q&A icon, please, rather than the chat icon to ask you questions, because that's where I'm going to be looking. So if you've asked in the chat icon, please move your question over to the Q&A button at the bottom. We'll get through as many of these as we can in the next 45 minutes or so. We're already seeing quite a few very interesting ones coming in. I just wanted to ask, to follow on a point that Andre Stein made there, and I'll open this to the entire panel. He talked about the internet, a technology that came along in the 90s and completely changed the world, changed the way we do everything, changed the global economy. Now, I said earlier that with aerospace, we've seen a lot of very incremental changes. Aircraft got slightly bigger, jet engines have got slightly more efficient with each new generation. But planes sort of look the same as they did in the 1950s, 1960s. Are we on the verge now, as some people seem to think, of a true step change in aerospace? Are we looking at technologies now that could really, in a matter of years, change the way that we fly? Hydrogen power, electric power. We talked obviously about UAMs, bringing a whole new type of transportation to the market. How close are we to a real big step change in aerospace in the next 10 years? Maybe Vikram, I'll come to you first on that one.
Yeah, I was going to come in that case. So by the way, Han and Stein, we are very much looking for your solutions in a city like Bangalore. And I'm sure it's same for many cities around the world. I think this time of aviation industry is truly remarkable. We've talked about incremental improvements. I actually think from an engine standpoint, we do make significant jumps in fuel efficiency. While it looks very similar for a person looking outside in, both from the airframers side, engine side, there have been remarkable fuel improvements in the last 30-40 years. Having said that, I still think this is a critical juncture for aviation industry. For the technologies that we're talking about, the electrification, the hydrogen as a fuel, and many other things that I've already talked about, the newer architectures, you will start seeing engines look very different. If we are going for an open fan, we will have this unducted fan, so you will not have the casings around those, and it might have its own reactions for the flying public, and we'll have to work with them to ensure that sentiment is taken care of. But the airframers or engine makers are working on newer ways of integrating all these solutions together. Getting the electrification, getting hydrogen power in. And it is it's the most important, most accelerated transition than ever happened in the history, both in terms of the fuel efficiency improvements. This will be the most rapid improvement that we will have, that we never had in the history. 20% improvement over our best operating engines now, over next decade or so. It's just astonishing improvements. Then in terms of emissions, again, it's we have very, very ambitious targets from now to 2050. And frankly, it's a noble cause. It is something that we all have to do as an aviation industry. It's not a choice anymore. And with all the combination of technologies that we talked about, it will transform single aisle market to begin with. Then it will go to the wide body market. Electrification will probably transform the urban mobility that Stein and Han are talking about. If you see the combination of all these three, I think next 10-20 years is going to be extremely different from what was there in the last 30-40 years. I feel it's the critical time in the history.
Thank you. Well, that's exciting stuff. Anand, how do you feel that we're on the next 10 years? Is it going to be a little bit more evolution of the technologies that we've got at the moment, slightly better planes, slightly more efficient planes, or are we really looking at a disruptive change in the way that the world flies?
I think it's pretty exciting. If you ask me, the momentum has really taken off quite a bit in terms of multiple technology vectors. And I was also looking at one of the questions where they were talking about what kind of vectors are we talking about? Is it sustainable aviation fuels? Is it batteries? Is it all the way up to hydrogen? And my answer is all of the above, and it's also solar. So, and the question is, what do we use these on? If we look at today's technologies, of course, the decarbonization is what's on everyone's mind, and it's accelerating at a very fast pace. Existing technologies already look at 20, 25, 40% improvement over previous technologies just with combustion engines. But the question is, what more can we do? It's not just either or, it's a combination of things. When you look at batteries, we're talking about microhybridization, which means you look at small batteries on planes or aircraft which are there already today that complement existing combustion engines today. Can give a benefit of 5% fuel burn, and helicopters 10% fuel burn. Now move ahead a little more to something like what Volocopter or Eve are talking about, or even Airbus is doing with our urban vehicles, where we can just use batteries and electric power, or even with EFAN, where we've used fixed-wing aircraft with batteries, and they work perfectly well, but because of the weight, the aircraft have to be small in size, which could be more for urban air mobility. And then we start to look at either solar or hydrogen. With solar, what we can do is, with the wingspan, we can look at high-altitude platforms, such as the Zephyr, which Airbus has created, where we can have an aircraft in the air for 2 weeks, which is mainly used for seeing, sensing, or communicating, not so much for people and payload. And hydrogen, the last frontier, what I'd like to talk about in more detail in a bit, is about true decarbonization. And as this exciting conversation moves on, I'll unravel that a little more.
Okay, well, we'll come on to that. I want to come on to electric and hydrogen and propulsion in a minute in a bit more detail. But Jeffrey, I mean, sticking to the sort of more general point, are we on the verge of something very, very transformative in aerospace?
Yeah, as an aerospace engineer, we know that aerospace development is usually more evolutionary. And if your question is whether we would actually enter the phase of a revolution, perhaps not quite yet, but if you ask me, I would say it's probably a revolutionary evolution, right? That a lot of things are happening. So we're seeing a confluence of many factors coming together, including digitization, sustainability, propulsion technology, electrification, and even COVID was contributed to, us moving faster ahead in many of these areas. So I would say, that, we all love to live in exciting times. And certainly, ST Engineering, we find that we are in a position to partake in some of these exciting developments. And it's no surprise that today we have many speakers who are in the area of urban air mobility. For us at ST Engineering, we are extremely excited about unmanned systems and maybe not quite yet about carrying people, but we've piloted many applications using unmanned aircraft systems for inspections of buildings, inspection of aircraft, inspection of reservoirs of water, security applications, surveillance of islands offshore of Singapore, delivery, but not just your typical delivery, but delivery from the shore to the ship, being able to fly in certain sea state, wind state, and be able to land on a ship fully automated. So some of these technologies are made totally possible today. And I think it's up to us in the industry to look for these applications and then to find the customers and find the partners to deliver them to the market.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, unmanned and remote cockpits is a whole webinar in its own. I think we could certainly talk at great length on that, as we could on a lot of other matters. I'm going to focus just briefly now on the urban air mobility side, and Honlung Chu and Andre Stein come in on this as you will. We've got quite a few questions coming in on this, so I want to just bundle a few together and answer whichever one's all or some if you want to. So my first question would be, you both talked about urban air mobility as being a solution to urban congestion, lots of traffic congestion on the roads. I mean, one question might be, if you're all successful and there's lots of eVTOLs flying around cities, aren't we just replacing congestion on the ground with congestion in the air, which could arguably be a lot more dangerous in 3 dimensions than 2 dimensions? That's one question. Another question from the audience was, what market research have you both done of consumers, of end users, to be convinced that this is something that the market will take to? Because ultimately, we can talk about cities and businesses coming on board. Ultimately, people have got to be happy to fly on these things. And a final question on urban air mobility. Do you think that working with airlines is the way forward? Is this really where the breakthrough will come, with airlines, established companies adopting urban air mobility as an offshoot of their existing operation? So you fly into Changi Airport or whatever, or JFK, and you get on an urban an eVTOL to your final destination. So who wants to start on one of these?
Can I get a crack on a few of them? So the first one is that if you're just bringing the problem up, literally giving another dimension to the problem, the way I see it, and I mentioned that in the beginning, we are not even being successful. The idea is not to replace ground transportation and in a complete state. The idea is to have other options to the people, and there will be situations where it's better just to get a bicycle or electric scooter to go from A to B, or public transportation or bus, train. In some occasions, you get the eVTOL. That said, we need to look at it. We need to not to create a new problem. And one of the things on that sense that we are doing is exactly to develop a solution for air traffic management, for urban air traffic management, a solution that bespoke for that. In a lot of markets today, never mind changing the word, but even today, you see that congestion happening already. If you get São Paulo, for example, it's one of the largest markets for air taxis in the world. You cannot have more than 6 helicopters flying in the same part of the city, being there at the same time, due to limitations to the air traffic control. So that's one of the key points to allow this market to grow, to really enable this market to grow in a safe way, in a integrated way, because it's still going to be sharing that same airspace with commercial aircraft, with general aviation, with drones now. So we really need to integrate that and make in a very safe way. What advantage we have versus what's going on the ground is that we're already starting at a level of technology, a pre-existing level of technology, much higher and very high standards when it comes to safety, right? The regulations there already to keep air safe. And there is this adage saying that traveling by air is the safest way to fly. I think all my friends here being from aerospace would agree with that. And there is a reason behind it. So we really need to tackle that and to address, to make sure we are growing in a very safe and scalable way. And that's, as I said, one of the points we are focused at. It's all about the ecosystem. That's point number one. The second question was about market research, and particularly with the end user. The answer is hell yeah. Yeah, we have been from the very beginning investing a lot of time talking with the user, understanding the needs before we came up with the product. Particularly not only in the beginning, but we have been doing that throughout the development. But there are a few examples on that. For example, focus on accessibility. We want to make sure we have a product where anyone, doesn't matter if you are in a wheelchair, if you're an elder, whoever you are, can get in and out in a very easy way. So we can not only be more open to all type of public, but also enhance the time on the ground, for example. And that's out of a lot of discussions we had from the very beginning. In the more recent stage, just a couple of months, less than a couple of months ago, actually, finalized that last December, we were together with partners flying helicopters in Rio from the east side of town to the international airport to simulate how that would be. And we did that for about a month. So we actually got real passengers using the current technology to simulate how it would be. We simulate the pricing point to be closer to where we believe Uber Air Mobility will be to have that type of volume. But, and to my previous point about the traffic management, we create a new route in the sky together with the local regulatory authority. We work with both the international airport and the other spot on the east side of town to understand even the ground operations and all that, but to understand from the user how the experience will be throughout the journey. One curiosity about this type of market research, even the name of the company came out of these discussions with the users. We got the name out of a crowdsourcing. We had about 2,000, we asked people how to name your eVTOL, how we'd call it. And we had inputs from over 30 countries, more than 2,000 suggestions. And at the same time, we were asking things like how often you're going to use, how much you're willing to pay to deliver that, to understand better what the user wants. So it is a combination of these online interviews, face-to-face interviews, literally hundreds of them in several cities around the world, including Singapore, Dubai, San Francisco, São Paulo. So we had that engagement. And the last question was about the model, who's going to be the operator by the end of the day. And the way you see, and that's happening already, and not only to us, I mean, we see that happening across the board, but we have a portfolio that does include airlines. We have, like, for example, the 2 largest regional airlines in the world as customers, SkyWest and Republic, but also helicopter operators. The airlines, they do understand about network operations. It's not only about the last mile, by the way. It's not only about getting the passenger from the airport home, but they understand how a network works, right? And that's what we expect to see, even though in a much smaller geographical scale, but you see a networking, and you're gonna need to worry about load factors, about utilization of her aircraft, the very high utilization. So that's some skills that airlines have. In the other end, we have the helicopter operators, and we have lots of different customers that are coming from that world that understand already from urban air mobility in a way, right? The helicopters cannot do that at scale because of noise, because of cost, but they give a sense on how it could work. And we are seeing helicopter operators join that. And there are also the disruptors, companies like ride-sharing companies. We have one from Singapore that's based in Singapore, Ascent. It's one of our customers that are connecting that to the end user in a very novel way, much closer to what you see in the ground happening with the ride-sharing apps. So it is a combination. It's a new segment, it's a new sector. So it's a unique opportunity to reinvent the business model as well. So we are positioning ourselves where we are working with the partners rather than just being purely OEMs and just selling the hardware, where you can really engage with all these different types of partners and create this new sector. So it is a new sector, and we are seeing players coming from different parts of the spectrum.
Okay, thank you, Andres. That's a great summary. Honlung, I'm going to give you an opportunity now to come in on these questions, and then I'll come on to the others with a different area of discussion.
In the interest of time, I'll be quite brief. I think Stein and I are quite obviously on the same wavelength. We've done multiple quantitative and qualitative, personal interviews, for example, validating demand here in Singapore. So maybe one particular figure is as part of our flight trial in 2019, and then the subsequent Airshow, we were able to survey, a mass public, and 72% of those surveys expressed interest in our service. They tend to be younger. They tend to, of course, have higher personal incomes. So I would say, not too unexpected. And maybe I come to the point, one of the key survey results is, the importance of safety. And this is why, we continue to be very, very focused on certifying the aircraft to the highest level of safety standard, above those 100 times more of helicopters, right? 10 to the -9, compared to, some of the existing players out there. And we think that is, really the key to really bringing customers on board. When we look at scale up, and maybe this is to address your question previously about whether this is a step function or not. I think it really depends on the scale of time you're looking at. When you're really zoomed in, probably in the next, let's say 5 years or so, you'll see this gradual change. But when you zoom out to maybe like 20 or 50 years, I think you do see a little bit more something that looks that resembles a step function change. That's our expectation. We are quite grounded and quite real about how this will progress. We are standing on top of giants, some of which are with us today, in the aviation industry, in terms of the standards and the regulations and really the safety requirements, right? But we do need to, as Stein has said, consider deviating from some of these, because we are operating in a different environment. We are much smaller, as Anand said. We are flying in much lower altitude, nowhere near flight level 300, and we are short distance in what we do. So we need to be able to consider the change in the operating environment without, again, compromising safety. And so we have considered all of these things in mind, and the digitalization of the platform is a key part to improving actually the safety of the existing systems. And maybe the last point that I will address is, is working with airlines the way forward. We obviously have investors as well as partners that are airlines. So Japan Airlines, for example, has, pre-ordered our aircraft. So in cases where we think it makes sense, certainly we work very closely with airlines as part of our go-to-market strategy. But I think in the initial stages, we are looking at becoming an AOC and airline operating, so getting an AOC and airline operating certificate ourselves, because we see the need to not compromise on that safety aspect. We know the aircraft ourselves best. We are able to offer the highest quality as well as the safety of service to our customers in the beginning, in order to really, let's say, iron out those kinks, right? And then be able to offer a business model that then scales tremendously from there working with partners. So hopefully that addresses some of your questions.
Thanks, Honna. That's great. I want to move on to, time's moving on. I want to move on to sustainability. Now we've seen, we've seen sustainability emerge as a massive issue for the industry. In the last few years, it's been around for a long time, but the focus has really got quite intense in the last few years, and probably even more so during the COVID crisis. The whole narrative about aviation being on the sort of like a growth path that would kind of go on forever, and it's perhaps been challenged by people now who are looking at flying and saying, I don't want to fly because it's unenvironmental, it's damaging the planet. Could aerospace and aviation, it's a drastic thing to say, but could it go the same way as the tobacco industry, where people shun it, people just stop flying? So what are the challenges when it comes to sustainability? How does technology help the industry get this message across that that it is not, aviation is not as damaging to the planet? It can be carbon neutral, possibly, or at least it's on the right path. Let's start with Vikram on that one. We've got about sort of just over 10 minutes left, so I'll ask you to keep your answers reasonably brief if you can.
Yeah, I'll keep it quick. I think we have two paths to solve this challenge, and it's imperative we need to do. One is a short-term path. We need to use more digital technologies for flight navigation, get better air traffic management, monitor the pilot operations using digital products, and make efficient use of the data to give us to be able to run the operations with lesser fuel. Then we have several on-wing, near-wing technologies. We can clean our, from an engine's perspective, we can clean it with our newer chemicals and materials. We call it foam wash in GE. That helps engines keep cool and they burn lesser fuel. So there are technologies in the short term that we can use to sort of keep the sustainability thing going, even with the current fleet. Then in the long run, we go towards the step change, the electrification, to start with sustainable aviation fuels, then progress more towards fuels like hydrogen, and do architecture changes that can reduce the fuel burn 20% or more, less than even the most efficient engines that are operating today. I think in the long run, three themes again: air traffic management, fuels, technology for engines and airframes. The combination of this, there is solution out there, Modo. We need to work our way through. Very exciting challenges for engineers, but we can make it work.
Okay, Anand, let's turn to you. What are the priorities for the industry over the next decade when it comes to sustainability?
Yeah, I think the key priority for mass transport for large aircraft would really be bring newer aircraft in place, which are 20-25% more efficient, followed by sustainable aviation fuels as the next step. And the third step, which Airbus has already committed to, is launching a prototype by 2025, which would be a zero carbon emission aircraft, a prototype, and to be commercially launched by 2035. The technology vector we're looking at really is hydrogen, because we believe it's the only vector that can, really carry the kind of number of people that we would need for mid to regional travel that we look at, because other decarbonized solutions such as electric or solar will not be able to create that kind of mobility unless it's in the urban sphere. So that's what we are excited about.
Okay, thank you. And Jeffrey, what do you see the priorities being for aerospace, and how important is getting the sustainability message across to the traveling public?
Well, we see sustainability from two perspectives. One is from the product and solution perspective. The other is from how we operate, our operational processes. And I'm happy to share that in Singapore, we are really one of the largest users of solar energy. 30% of our energy needs come from solar energy. Basically, we've put solar panels on all the roofs of all our hangars and buildings across the whole island. But But of course, from a product perspective, I think that's where really a lot of focus is. And as an MRO and also as an OEM of certain systems, for example, nacelle systems, we're obviously looking at a better material, lighter, stronger, more acoustically optimized material that can give better aerodynamic qualities to the engine, so that the aircraft can fly and burn less fuel. But from a MRO perspective, when we looked at it, we figured out that we've been doing sustainability for the longest time because we've been refurbishing, salvaging, repairing, maintaining aircraft and systems on board aircraft so that they don't get junked, don't get scrapped, And our latest solutions in partnership with Anand Airbus, is to deliver the passenger to freighter conversion for the A320, 321, and 330, and really giving a new lease of life to retired passenger aircraft that would otherwise have been scrapped. So from a product perspective, I think if we can increase our efforts on how we can recycle aircraft and aircraft systems, convert, extend the life of these aircraft, then we're doing everybody a favor because it's simply salvaging parts and not having to scrap them, and not having to build a whole new one, Thank you.
Absolutely. I mean, parts recycling and reusing old aircraft. That's again a huge topic that we could spend a lot more time on. We've just got about 5 minutes left, so I'm going to ask a final question to all of you. The same question, and if you could just keep your answers to about a minute each, that would be great. So we're in 2042, 20 years from now, and you're about to fly from, I don't know, Singapore to London, or from your office in downtown Singapore to the north of the island, or from Wall Street to Long Island. Describe to me how that journey will be different or might be different to one you make today. And as I say, keep your answers as short as you can, because we're just coming to the end of the session. So Stein, let me start with you. What are the differences that we're going to see in aviation in 20 years' time?
I mentioned about bringing to the physical world everything you saw in the internet. Call it Internet of Mobility, if you might. And that's one of I think the key point. It will be much more integrated. It could be from Jurong to London, and all that's going to need to be integrated. It's going to need to be sustainable. It's going to need to be accessible in a ways that we haven't seen yet. So very transparent from the user point of view, very easy to use, very affordable. I do see mobility as a force for good for the world. So I think it's just going to be easier. And even the things that we are doing today, they increment. It's not being virtually here, but I mean, they increment this connectivity, that the range of choices to communicate and to connect are going larger and larger, and more they will be more integrated, environmentally friendly and affordable.
Thank you. Honglun Chu, 20 years time, how will flying be different?
Yeah, maybe I expand on that a bit. I think we see, of course, autonomous, air taxis coming into place, and I think the range of it will improve, right, to allow actually for regional connectivity, so that Changi can remain the aviation hub, not just for Singapore, but also, let's say 100-kilometer radius, right, around Singapore, all the way to, let's say, Malacca, and certainly Bintan, Batam, and JB. So you will have a seamless journey where you're able to board one of our air taxis, flying from, within that 100-kilometer radius, going to Changi, and then catching your flight. We are, of course, admittedly focused on, the last mile. So I think I will leave that long haul journey to Anand and Vikram.
Okay, Vikram, 20 years time, what's gonna have changed?
Yeah, I think for the long haul journey, I can say that probably our boarding cards would have carbon printed on it, in addition to the time that you land. As individuals, we will definitely have choice. of making lesser impact to the environment, keeping it environment friendly. So I would say that there would be more solutions, more options available for us to keep it environment friendly.
Okay, thank you, Vikram. Anand, 2042, what's my flight going to look like?
My flight, your flight is going to look like from Malacca to Singapore. You're going to be on an Airbus 0E with RISE engines, on hydrogen fuel, zero emissions. You're going to catch one of our larger state-of-the-art A350s, which will fly from here to London, either on 100% SAF or on synthetic fuels, which have been made by hydrogen, again, zero emissions. And once you land in London, we're going to put you on an Airbus City Gen Next electric vehicle, which will take you to the suburbs of your beautiful home, again, fully electric, zero emissions. And throughout your flight, you will have a solar generated urban vehicle, fully unmanned, which will be providing you with all kinds of communications and entertainment.
Anand, I can't wait. Jeffrey, what is your vision for 20 years' time?
Okay, after hearing about all the exciting technologies, then I would say that one of the challenges would certainly be ensuring that flying is affordable. And then the concerns around regulation, I think the other aspect would be safe, even though I may be flying on Anand's hydrogen-powered aircraft. Okay, and lastly, I think we all want predictability, in terms of arriving on time and having everything integrated. So affordable, safe, and predictable.
Okay, well, we could certainly all hope for that. That just about brings us to the end of our allocated time today. I would like to thank our exclusive webinar partners, CFM, for their support, and all our panelists for giving so generously of their time and insights today. We had 5 people in the panel. We could have talked for a very, very much longer time. I'm sorry that we didn't get a chance to the audience to get through more of your questions. We had a lot of great questions in. They were, a lot of them, quite specific, and we could have spent many, many minutes just discussing each of these questions. So thank you all again. FlightGlobal will be reporting from the Singapore Airshow next month, including on some of the technologies that we talked about today. If you're going, remember to pick up your Flight Daily News each morning. And if you're not, we'll be covering the show in detail on flightglobal.com. We also have a full program of webinars coming up this year. So again, keep your eye on our website for details. Thanks again for watching. Take care and have a successful and safe 2022.